David, a loyal husband, finds a used condom in his SUV's back seat. It's not his. His wife, Maria, brushes it off, but the evidence piles up. Fueled by betrayal, David, an insurance adjuster, turns his knack for uncovering truth into a calculated plan for justice. What unfolds is a gripping tale of deception, confrontation, and a public reckoning that'll leave you speechless. David Morales, a 35-year-old insurance adjuster in Miami, had built a life on spotting the truth in chaos. For over a decade, he'd waded through the wreckage of fender benders, flooded condos, and kitchen fires sparked by careless tenants. His job at Coastal Mutual demanded a sharp eye for detail, skid marks that didn't match a driver's story, water damage that smelled of fraud. He was good at it, the kind of guy who could read a scene like a crime novel and pin down the facts. At home, though, the facts were starting to blur. Married for 16 years to Maria, David had watched her transform from a dreamer cutting hair at a strip mall salon to the proud owner of Bella Vita, a chic spot on Main Street. She was a force, managing a team of stylists and pulling in more cash than David's steady paycheck. Their son, Carlos, 16 and sharp as a tack, juggled honor roll grades and a weekend gig at a hardware store. On paper, they were the American dream. House in the suburbs, a kid with a future, and a marriage that had weathered its share of storms. But storms leave cracks, and David was about to stumble into one. It was a humid Tuesday evening when David climbed into his Ford Explorer, the family's second car, to grab some takeout. Maria had borrowed it the day before, claiming she needed to hit the beauty supply warehouse for her salon. "My Honda's acting up again," she'd said, barely glancing up from her phone, her voice sweet but distracted. David hadn't thought twice about it. He trusted her. That's what you do after 16 years, right? Trust. Then he saw it. Tucked between the center console and Carlos's old baseball glove, barely hidden, was a used condom. Not in a wrapper, not tossed carelessly like trash from a joyride. It was still slick, still warm. David froze, staring at it like it was a live grenade. His brain scrambled, trying to reject the obvious, like a computer spitting out an error code. He grabbed a napkin from the glove box, picked it up like evidence from a crime scene, and dropped it into a plastic bag. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the gut punch of betrayal. David wasn't a fool. He'd spent years dissecting other people's lies. Policyholders who swore their car was totaled by a phantom deer, homeowners who claimed a pipe burst when they'd left the faucet running. He knew the signs of deception. And this wasn't Carlos sneaking around with a girlfriend. Carlos drove a beat-up Civic and spent his nights buried in calculus homework or sorting nails at the hardware store. The kid didn't have time for backseat hookups, let alone the nerve to leave evidence in his dad's car. Maria was in the kitchen when David walked in, the air thick with the scent of sizzling garlic and white wine. She stirred a pan, her phone propped on the counter, glowing with whatever held her attention. "Hey, hon," she said, flashing a smile that used to make David's chest warm. Now it felt like a mask. "How was work?" "Same old," David said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. He set the plastic bag on the counter, hidden behind a stack of mail. Found something weird in the Explorer. Her spoon paused for a split second, barely noticeable, but David caught it. He'd been trained to notice hesitations, the tiny tells that separate truth from fiction. "Oh," Maria said, her tone light. "What kind of weird?" "A used condom. Back seat. Near Carlos's glove." Maria's laugh was quick, a little too sharp. "Gross. Probably Carlos. You know how kids are." She kept stirring, but her knuckles whitened around the spoon. "Teenagers, right? Always sneaking around." David leaned against the counter, studying her. "Carlos. You sure? He's been at the store or school nonstop. When's he got time for that?" Maria shrugged, her eyes flicking to her phone. "Kids make time. Remember us at that age?" David remembered. Late nights in his old Chevy, stealing kisses with Maria when they were both broke and starry-eyed. But he also remembered Carlos coming home last night, still in his hardware store apron, griping about a customer who'd made him reorganize the plumbing aisle. The timeline didn't add up. Neither did Maria's nonchalance. After dinner, David cornered Carlos in his room. The kid was hunched over his desk, pencil scratching through a calculus problem set. "Hey, bud," David said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Need to ask you something. Be straight with me." Carlos looked up, his brow furrowing. "What's up, Dad? You ever use my Explorer for anything I should know about?" Carlos blinked, confused. "Your car? Why would I? I've got the Civic. It's not great, but it gets me around." "Found something in the back seat," David said, keeping his tone neutral. "Made me curious." Like what? Carlos's face was open, no twitch in his eye, no fidgeting hands. None of the tells David had memorized from years of bedtime stories and scraped knees. The kid was either a master liar or genuinely clueless. David bet on the latter. Forget it, David said, ruffling Carlos's hair. Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Later that night, as Maria scrolled through her phone in bed, the blue light casting shadows across the room, David lay awake, his mind working like it did on a tough claim. He'd always kept meticulous records, mileage logs for tax deductions, gas receipts, maintenance schedules. It was dull, but it saved him money and headaches. Now, it might save him something else. He slipped out of bed, grabbed his notebook from the kitchen, and started cross-checking. Maria had said she'd gone to the beauty supply warehouse, a 12-mile trip from their house. Round trip, maybe 25 miles with a coffee stop. But the Explorer's odometer showed 38 extra miles when she'd brought it back. Where had those 13 miles come from? David opened his laptop, pulled up Google Maps, and traced possible routes. The warehouse was north of Miami. 13 extra miles could take you plenty of places, like the cluster of auto shops off Biscayne Boulevard, where the air smelled of oil and second chances. David's gut told him Maria was hiding something. His head told him to find proof. Tomorrow, he'd start digging, the way he always did when the truth was buried under someone's story. For now, he climbed back into bed, the space between him and Maria feeling wider than ever. David Morales wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was stacking up like a bad claim file. The used condom in his Ford Explorer, Maria's too quick dismissal, the extra 13 miles on the odometer. It all pointed to a truth he wasn't ready to face. But David had spent over a decade as an insurance adjuster, sifting through half-truths and outright lies. If Maria was hiding something, he'd find it. He always did. The next morning, Maria left early for Bella Vita, her salon. Got an early client, she said, pecking David's cheek with a rushed smile, her coffee breath sharp. Mrs. Alvarez needs her highlights before her niece's quinceanera. David nodded, playing the part of the trusting husband, but his mind was already working. As soon as her Honda pulled out of the driveway, he grabbed his laptop and started digging. His job had taught him to follow the trail, receipts, timestamps, patterns. He pulled up the Explorer's mileage log again, confirming the 38 miles from Maria's supply run. The beauty supply warehouse was a straight shot, 12 miles each way. Even with a detour for gas or a drive-through, 38 miles was too much. He mapped out possible stops within a 13-mile radius. One area stood out, a gritty strip off Biscayne Boulevard, home to dive bars, pawn shops, and a cluster of auto repair joints. Something clicked. Maria had complained about her Honda's brakes squeaking lately. Maybe she'd taken it somewhere for a quick fix, and more. David's next move was a calculated risk. During his lunch break, he drove to his office at Coastal Mutual and ordered a GPS tracker online. $39 for a palm-sized device that could pinpoint the Explorer's location in real time. It arrived the next day, and he installed it under the rear bumper, securing its magnetic case near the spare tire mount. No one would find it unless they were looking. He synced it to an app on his phone and waited. 2 days later, the app lit up. Maria took the Explorer again, claiming another supply run. The tracker showed her heading to the warehouse as promised, but then she veered off, stopping for 15 minutes at the Starlight Motel, a rundown spot known for hourly rates and questionable clientele. After that, she spent 20 minutes at Tony's Repairs, a small auto shop tucked behind a gas station. The pattern repeated twice that week: warehouse, motel, shop. Each stop was short, precise, like a routine she'd perfected. David's stomach twisted, but he stayed methodical. He drove by Tony's Repairs during his next lunch break. The place was exactly what he'd expected: oil-stained pavement, a handwritten sign boasting fast fixes, low prices, and a lineup of cars in various states of disrepair. Behind the counter stood Tony, a broad-shouldered guy in his late 30s, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He had the kind of easy grin that could charm a flustered soccer mom, or a salon owner looking for more than a tune-up. Need something fixed? Tony asked, sizing David up. Just browsing, David said, keeping his tone neutral. My wife mentioned this place. Said you do solid work. Who's your wife? Tony leaned forward, curious. Maria Morales. Drives a blue Honda. Tony's grin widened, just enough to make David's jaw clench. Oh yeah, Maria. Great lady. Real friendly. We took care of her brakes last week. Brakes, huh? David said. She mentioned it was a quick job. Cheap, too. We aim to please, Tony said, tossing the rag onto the counter. Customer satisfaction's our thing. David wanted to wipe that smirk off his face, but he wasn't here to start a fight. He was here to collect data. Good to know, he said, forcing a smile. I'll keep you in mind. Back at the office, David dug deeper. He found a crumpled receipt in Maria's purse when she left it on the kitchen counter. A $50 charge from Tony's Repairs, dated 3 days ago, for brake service. He called a mechanic friend, Javier, who confirmed $50 for brake work was absurdly low, unless it was a sham job. David's suspicion hardened into certainty. Maria wasn't just getting her car fixed. That night, he checked Maria's phone bill online, something he'd never done in 16 years of marriage. The account was in his name, so access was easy. A number popped up repeatedly in her texts and calls, always around the times the GPS showed her at the motel or Tony's. A quick reverse lookup tied the number to Tony Garcia, owner of Tony's Repairs. The texts were locked behind Maria's passcode, but the call logs were enough to paint a picture. David sat in his home office, the glow of his laptop the only light in the room. He cross-referenced everything: the GPS data, the mileage logs, the receipt, the call logs. It was a case as tight as any he'd built for a fraudulent claim. Maria was cheating, and Tony was her accomplice. The realization didn't hit like a wave of anger. It was colder, sharper, like a blade sliding into place. He wasn't just a betrayed husband. He was an adjuster with a knack for exposing lies, and he was about to turn that skill on his own life. The question wasn't whether to confront Maria, it was how. A quiet talk over dinner wouldn't cut it. She'd lied to his face, deflected with a smile, and kept up the act while their son slept down the hall. David needed something bigger, something that would make her face the consequences. Bella Vita's annual client appreciation event was coming up, a glitzy party for Maria's loyal customers. David saw his chance. He'd volunteer to help, maybe set up a slideshow to celebrate the salon's success. Maria would never suspect a thing. He leaned back in his chair, the GPS app still open on his phone, a blinking dot showing the Explorer parked at home. Maria was in the living room, probably texting Tony, oblivious to the net tightening around her. David wasn't a vengeful man, but he was a thorough one. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a conversation, it would be a reckoning. David Morales had spent weeks assembling the pieces of Maria's deception, each bit of evidence a brick in the case he was building. The GPS tracker on his Ford Explorer had mapped her secret detours to the Starlight Motel and Tony's Repairs. Call logs linked her to Tony Garcia, the mechanic with a slick smile and a shady business. A $50 receipt for a questionable brake job sealed the deal. David wasn't just a husband scorned. He was an insurance adjuster with a talent for exposing lies, and he was ready to act. Bella Vita's annual client appreciation event loomed, a splashy affair where Maria's loyal customers sipped wine and booked their next appointments. It was the perfect stage for David's plan. 2 weeks before the event, he offered to help. I could set up a slideshow, he said over breakfast, his tone casual. Highlight the salon's journey, maybe some client testimonials. Maria, distracted by her phone, barely looked up. That'd be great, hon, she said, oblivious to the trap. David nodded, hiding the resolve burning in his chest. He spent nights in his home office, curating his presentation. No before and after hair photos or glowing reviews. Instead, he compiled damning proof, screenshots of Maria's call logs, showing late-night chats with Tony, GPS data pinpointing her stops at the motel, a photo of her blue Honda parked outside Tony's Repairs at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday when she'd claimed to be at a vendor meeting. The crown jewel was a recording he'd gotten from a buddy who'd done some electrical work at Tony's shop. Tony, unaware of the phone recording nearby, had bragged to a coworker, "This salon lady's crazy for me. Married to some desk jockey, but she's at my place twice a week. Easy money, too. Charged her $50 for a brake tweak she didn't need." David tested the slideshow on his laptop, each slide a calculated blow. He wasn't aiming to destroy Maria out of spite. He wanted her to face the truth in front of the people who trusted her most. The event was set for a Saturday afternoon, and as the day approached, David played the dutiful husband, helping Maria order catering and set up tables. She seemed relieved, maybe even hopeful, mistaking his cooperation for forgiveness. He let her believe it. The salon buzzed with energy on the day of the event. 35 women filled the space, chatting over cheese platters and Prosecco, their laughter echoing off the walls. Maria worked the room, charming clients with her usual flair, while David quietly connected his laptop to a projector he'd borrowed from work. The 70-inch screen glowed blank, waiting for its moment. Maria, in her element, clapped her hands to gather the crowd. "Ladies," she announced, "my husband David put together a little something to celebrate Bella Vita's journey. Let's give him a hand." David stepped forward, remote in hand, and forced a smile. "Thanks, Maria. This place means a lot to all of us, so I wanted to share its story and a few other things." The crowd clapped, expecting a feel-good montage. The first slide appeared, a photo from Bella Vita's grand opening, Maria cutting the ribbon with a beaming smile, David holding a baby Carlos in the background. The women cooed, nostalgic. The second slide showed Maria and David at a charity event 2 years ago, arms around each other. "Ah, you two are so cute," called out a client named Carla. Then the third slide hit. A time-stamped photo of Maria's Honda parked outside the Starlight Motel at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, when she told David she was at a hair expo in Fort Lauderdale. The room went quiet, the air thick with confusion. David clicked to the next slide, a screenshot of Maria's call log, showing 12 calls to Tony Garcia over 3 days. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "What's this?" someone muttered. Maria froze by the refreshment table, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "David," she said, her voice low but sharp. "What are you doing?" "Showing everyone what Bella Vita's really about," David said, his tone calm but unyielding. The next slide displayed the $50 receipt from Tony's repairs, followed by a GPS log mapping Maria's route from the beauty supply warehouse to the motel to Tony's shop. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A client named Rosa stood up, arms crossed. "Maria, is this true?" "It's not what it looks like," Maria stammered, stepping toward the projector. David clicked again, and Tony's recorded voice filled the room, smug and clear. "She's married to some boring insurance guy, but she can't get enough of me. Comes by twice a week, sometimes 3. I charge her pocket change for fake repairs. She doesn't know the difference." The salon erupted. Women gasped, some shouted questions, others stared at Maria in disbelief. Carla, a longtime client, pointed at the screen. "You're sleeping with that mechanic? In his garage?" Maria lunged for the projector, but David stepped in front of it, remote still in hand. "They deserve to know," he said, nodding to the crowd. "These are your clients, Maria. They trusted you." "It's not true," Maria snapped, her voice cracking. "This is a setup." But the evidence was undeniable, each slide a nail in the coffin of her lies. The final slide showed a text from Tony to Maria, pulled from a backup David had accessed. "Can't wait for tomorrow. We're that red thing." The crowd's outrage boiled over. "You've been lying to all of us," Rosa shouted. David shut off the projector, the screen going dark. He looked at Maria, her face a mix of fury and shame, and felt no triumph, just a hollow ache. "You made your choices," he said quietly. "Now live with them." He packed up his laptop and walked out, leaving Maria to face her clients alone, their trust shattered in the span of 10 minutes. The aftermath of David Morales' slideshow at Bella Vita's client appreciation event hit like a hurricane tearing through Miami. Maria's carefully curated world unraveled in real time as her clients, once loyal, turned on her with a mix of shock and disgust. By the time David walked out of the salon, leaving the projector's blank screen behind, the damage was done. The truth about Maria's affair with Tony Garcia, the sleazy mechanic, wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a public scandal. Word spread fast in their tight-knit community. By Monday morning, Bella Vita's appointment book was bleeding cancellations. Clients who'd trusted Maria for years, mothers, businesswomen, retirees, called to reschedule with other salons or simply stopped booking. Rosa, the outspoken client who'd confronted Maria during the slideshow, posted a scathing review online, calling out the unprofessional conduct and breach of trust. The post racked up shares, each one chipping away at the salon's reputation. Within a week, Maria was down to a skeleton crew of stylists, and her revenue plummeted by half. David didn't stop at exposing Maria. He turned his attention to Tony's repairs, leveraging his network from years in the insurance game. He called up a contact, Luis, who worked in the city's business licensing office. Luis owed David a favor after he'd smoothed over a claim involving a botched car repair for a mutual friend. "Check out Tony's repairs on Biscayne," David said over coffee. "I've got a hunch they're cutting corners." Luis didn't need much convincing. A quick audit revealed Tony's shop was operating without a valid license, its insurance lapsed, and its inspection certification suspended for passing cars that should have been scrapped. By the end of the week, the state shut Tony's repairs down, towing away 3 vehicles, including one owned by a city council member's brother. Tony faced thousands in fines and a looming court date. Maria tried to salvage things. She texted David late one night, a week after the event, her message a jumble of apologies and excuses. "I messed up, David. Can we talk? I never meant to hurt you." He read it, his thumb hovering over the reply button, but didn't respond. Her words felt hollow, like a policyholder swearing their flooded basement was an accident after leaving the windows open during a storm. David had spent too long analyzing lies to fall for hers now. Instead, he focused on moving forward. He leased a one-bedroom apartment in Coral Gables, a quiet spot with a balcony just big enough for a folding chair. It wasn't the suburban house he'd shared with Maria, but it was his, a clean slate. He and Carlos, their 16-year-old son, settled into a new rhythm. Carlos stayed with David most weekends, and they built a routine around takeout pizza and late-night talks about school, baseball, and the future. Carlos didn't ask much about his mom, but David could tell the kid was hurting. "She's trying," Carlos said one evening, tossing a crust onto his plate. "But it's weird, you know? Like she's pretending nothing happened." David nodded, choosing his words carefully. "She's got to face what she did, bud. We all do." He didn't tell Carlos about the slideshow or the full extent of Maria's affair. The kid deserved to keep some faith in his mom, even if David couldn't. Maria's attempts to rebuild her life hit roadblocks. Bella Vita's remaining clients were mostly gossip seekers, more interested in the scandal than their haircuts. 2 stylists quit, citing the toxic vibe, leaving Maria scrambling to cover shifts. She called David again, this time leaving a voicemail. "You didn't have to ruin everything," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "The salon was my dream. You took that from me." David deleted the message. He hadn't taken her dream. She'd gambled it away on Tony. Meanwhile, Tony's troubles deepened. The state's investigation uncovered a pattern of fraudulent repairs, including overcharging customers for unnecessary work. A local news outlet picked up the story, plastering Tony's name across a segment about shady mechanics. His landlord, citing a lease clause against illegal operations, evicted him from the shop. Tony packed up and left Miami, rumor had it, chasing a fresh start somewhere up the coast. David didn't care where he went, as long as he was gone. David's own life wasn't perfect. The apartment felt empty on weeknights when Carlos was with Maria. Work at Coastal Mutual kept him busy, but the familiar routine of assessing claims couldn't erase the ache of 16 years of marriage undone. Still, he found clarity in the chaos. He'd exposed the truth, not out of cruelty, but because lies fester. Maria's choices had consequences, and he'd made sure they caught up with her. One evening, as David sorted through paperwork in his new place, Carlos dropped by unannounced, carrying a bag of burgers from a nearby joint. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the bag on the counter. They ate in silence for a while, the hum of the city outside filling the gaps. Then Carlos spoke up. "Mom's struggling, Dad. The salon's barely hanging on. She says you humiliated her." David set his burger down. "I didn't do it to hurt her, Carlos. I did it so people knew the truth. She made choices that broke our family. I just made sure they weren't a secret." Carlos nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. "I get it. I just wish it didn't have to be like this." "Me too," David said, and he meant it. But wishing wouldn't change the facts, and David was done ignoring those. 6 months after David Morales exposed Maria's affair at Bella Vita's client appreciation event, the dust had settled, but the scars remained. The divorce was finalized in a sterile Miami courtroom, the judge's gavel sealing the end of 16 years of marriage. David kept the suburban house, half the salon's appraised value, and primary custody of their son, Carlos. Maria walked away with her Honda, a handful of loyal clients, and a lesson etched in the ruins of her reputation. David didn't feel victorious, just relieved, like finishing a claim file that had dragged on too long. Bella Vita limped along, a shadow of its former self. Maria slashed prices to lure back customers, but the gossip lingered like a stubborn stain. Only a dozen regulars stuck around, some out of pity, others for the cheap cuts. She hired a new stylist to replace the ones who'd jumped ship, but the salon's books were in the red. Maria's texts to David dwindled, her pleas for reconciliation replaced by curt updates about Carlos's schedule. David responded when necessary, keeping things civil for their son's sake. Carlos, now 17, navigated the split with the cautious grace of a tightrope walker. He spent weekdays with Maria, helping her close up the salon some nights, and weekends with David, where they'd grill burgers or watch old baseball games on TV. One Saturday, as they tossed a ball in the backyard, Carlos asked, "You ever think about forgiving Mom?" David caught the ball, pausing. Forgiving's one thing, he said. Trusting's another. She broke something we can't rebuild. Carlos nodded, tossing the ball back, and they let the silence speak. David's new life in Coral Gables was simple but steady. His one-bedroom apartment became a haven, filled with the hum of routine, work, gym, and evenings scrolling through case files or streaming shows with Carlos. He didn't date, not yet. The wound was too fresh, and he wasn't ready to risk another betrayal. Instead, he poured his energy into being a better father, showing up for Carlos's school events, and helping him prep for college applications. The kid was aiming for engineering, and David swelled with pride every time Carlos talked about his future. Tony Garcia, the mechanic who'd sparked the collapse, was long gone. After his shop was shuttered by the state, he'd skipped town, leaving behind unpaid fines and a trail of angry customers. A contact at the licensing office told David that Tony had tried setting up a new garage in Tampa, but word of his shady practices followed him, and the venture tanked. David didn't wish him ill. He just wanted him out of their lives, and the universe had obliged. One humid March evening, David was in the supermarket, weighing the merits of frozen pizza versus tacos, when he heard a familiar laugh from the next aisle. Maria stood there, chatting with two women he recognized from Bella Vita, Carla and a newer client, Elena. They were huddled by the wine display, their voices low but animated. David destroyed my business to prove a point, Maria was saying, her tone bitter. It wasn't about the affair, it was about control. Carla shook her head. Maria, you stepped out on him. With a guy who ripped you off for fake repairs. That's not control, that's consequences. Elena chimed in, her voice softer. You had a good thing with David. Why throw it away for some fling? David pushed his cart around the corner, the wheels squeaking. The women froze, Maria's eyes locking onto his. For a moment, no one spoke. Then David said, funny thing about consequences, they don't care about your excuses. He nodded to Carla and Elena. Ladies, good to see you. They murmured awkward hellos, their attention darting to the wine bottles like they held the answers. Maria squared her shoulders, her voice low. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone, David. You could have handled it privately. You could have handled a lot of things differently, he shot back. Like keeping your promises. Or not lying to my face while our son was in the next room. He kept his tone even, but the words cut. You built Bella Vita on trust. I just showed your clients who you really are. Maria's lips parted, but no words came. Carla stepped forward, her voice firm. He's right, Maria. You can't blame him for your choices. Elena nodded, and Maria's defiance crumbled, her shoulders slumping as she stared at the floor. David pushed his cart past, pausing briefly. You wanted something new, Maria. You got it. Hope it was worth it. He walked away, leaving her with her friends and her regrets, the weight of her decisions heavier than any slideshow. Back at his apartment, David reheated leftovers and sat on his balcony, the Miami skyline flickering in the distance. He thought about Maria's words. Control, humiliation, fairness. Maybe he'd gone too far, turning her betrayal into a public spectacle. Maybe a quieter confrontation would have spared Carlos some pain. But quiet hadn't worked. Maria had lied, deflected, and carried on until David forced the truth into the open. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo of him and Carlos at a Marlins game, both grinning under the stadium lights. That was what mattered now, building a life with his son, grounded in truth, not secrets. Justice wasn't about feeling good. It was about setting things right. And as David leaned back, the city humming below, he knew he'd done exactly that.